I'm David Kane. I'm 41 years old, and I served as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. 20 years, multiple deployments, classified operations you'd never read about, and now, apparently, I'm just her husband. I didn't think much of it until that dinner last Thanksgiving. Her family rented out this fancy restaurant in Alexandria, something about the ambiance and the wine list. I showed up early to help her mom with the seating chart, but she waved me off like I was just the guy tagging along. I stood near the bar while everyone filtered in, old money types and cousins with trust funds. One of them, a lawyer named Garrett, leaned over and asked if I still worked on airplanes. I told him I was retired from the military, and before I could finish, he smirked and said, "Oh, so now you're just at home then?" It wasn't the words. It was the way he said it. Like I had surrendered my relevance the day I stopped clocking in at the base. Like every uniform I ever wore was just cosplay now. My wife laughed. She didn't correct him, just sipped her wine and changed the subject to her firm's quarterly numbers. Everyone listened. Nobody asked me a single follow-up. Throughout the night, I kept hearing it. Little comments, passive, sharp. David doesn't do much these days. He's a great cook, though. Must be nice to kick back while your wife climbs the ladder. I nodded along, smiled when appropriate, but inside, something twisted. Not anger, not even sadness. Just a tight, bitter knot of invisibility. It's a funny thing, serving your country. You spend decades training to protect something bigger than yourself, only to come home and realize you've disappeared in plain sight. You go from commanding squadrons to setting tables. From briefings at the Pentagon to being told you're lucky she tolerates your silence. They called me her +1 that night. Not David, not Colonel Kane, just her +1. The guy who drove. The man who stood by the coat check while they toasted her latest promotion. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Because I knew something they didn't. And eventually, I'd remind them who I am. Every morning started the same. I'd wake up before dawn, out of habit more than necessity, and move through the house like a ghost on a mission. The coffee was always first, just the way she liked it, 1 sugar, splash of oat milk, cinnamon dusted across the top. Then came breakfast. Eggs over easy, toast without butter, always on the blue plate with the chipped edge. I'd pack our son's lunch while listening to the news, something neutral, something background. After waking him up and walking him through the same morning checklist, we'd drive to school in silence broken only by traffic updates and the occasional joke I told just to see if he'd smile. I didn't mind the routine. It gave the day structure, purpose. But somewhere between packing lunchboxes and dry cleaning receipts, I started to forget what my own calendar used to look like. She worked late most nights. Fundraisers, conferences, industry mixers. And I was always there, standing just out of frame. I learned how to fold pocket squares to match her outfits. I practiced small talk and polite laughter. At cocktail hours, I'd get introduced as David, her husband. If I were lucky, they'd add that he stays home a lot lately. Sometimes they'd ask what I used to do. I'd say military and watch their eyes flick past me like I was fading into the wallpaper. It wasn't rude, it was worse. It was a polite dismissal. I did everything I could to keep the machine running. Oil changes, grocery lists, teacher conferences, leaking pipes. She never had to worry. I made sure of that. But no one applauded silent systems. No one notices a roof that never leaks. I started to forget what it felt like to be asked about my day. Not as a formality, but as a genuine question. Even our son started to model her tone. Quick, distracted, transactional. I told myself this was just a phase. That support looked like this. Quiet, durable, steady. But every time I walked through those rooms full of suits and smiles, every time I heard her describe me like a background character in her movie, something chipped. Not all at once, just slow erosion. And I let it. I told myself I was doing it for her, for our family. Maybe it didn't matter if no one knew what I gave up. But deep down, I missed being seen. I missed being someone with a story that didn't start and end with someone else's name. And the quiet. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. like a weighted blanket I couldn't take off. The car ride was quiet, the kind where you could hear the leather seats shift beneath you. She was scrolling through emails, lips pressed tight like she was prepping for battle. I adjusted my tie and glanced over, waiting for a sliver of warmth, maybe a look, maybe nothing. Then it came. "Can you just not talk too much tonight? Especially about the military stuff. Some of them get uncomfortable." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because it was easier than asking why my life made people squirm at a dinner table. She didn't look up from her phone, just kept typing, calm and clinical. I swallowed whatever was rising in my throat and turned to the window. The city passed by in a blur of headlights and glass towers. My name wasn't on any of them. I used to give briefings to generals, navigate billion-dollar equipment, and make life or death calls in the sky. Now I was being warned not to make executives feel awkward over hors d'oeuvres. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. This new role of mine, this quiet, smiling prop who didn't take up too much space. She finally looked up as we pulled into the valet. "Just be presentable," she said, smoothing the front of her dress, "and try not to bring up rank or anything. It sounds intense." I smiled, the kind you give someone who doesn't know they just stepped on your throat. Then I got out and opened her door, because that's what I did. Because silence, apparently, was the new definition of love. I barely had time to adjust in my seat when a hand clapped hard on my back, jolting me forward. The room around me buzzed with champagne and polished laughs, but that single gesture cut right through it. I turned to see Marcus Blaine, her team's golden boy, standing there grinning like he just spotted a ghost. He raised his glass, loud enough for the tables around us to hush. "Look who they let out of retirement. Thought you'd be in camo, not a rental suit." The laughter started small, like a fuse, then spread. A ripple of polished smirks and glass clinks, heads leaning toward each other like it was the best line of the night. I tried to laugh it off, tried to swallow the heat crawling up my neck, but then I heard her, my wife, laughing. Not a nervous chuckle, not a polite deflection. A full, clear laugh that echoed across the ballroom and landed like a slap. She even raised her glass toward Marcus, eyes bright, like they shared an inside joke I didn't deserve to understand. I felt something split right down the middle of my chest. Not rage, not shame. Something worse. That quiet, hollow ache that only shows up when the person who's supposed to protect you joins the crowd, tearing you down. Someone from the next table leaned over and said he thought I was some kind of stay-at-home dad. Another voice chimed in. Thought he just ran errands and folded towels, more laughter. Even the waiters looked like they were holding in grins. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went pale. My jaw locked. I could hear my heartbeat, loud, drowning everything else out. I didn't stand, didn't shout. I just looked across the room at her. She wasn't even looking back. She was busy clinking glasses with Gabrielle, her VP, smiling like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't sitting there being gutted in real time. It wasn't about the joke. I'd heard worse. I'd survived war zones, screamed orders through bullet fire. But this felt like betrayal, wearing a dress I helped her pick out. For years, I'd made excuses for her. Told myself she was just tired, just stressed, just unaware. But no one laughs like that by accident. No one smiles through cruelty unless they've grown comfortable with it. That was the moment, right there, when the room spun a little and the edges of my world pulled back just enough to show what I hadn't wanted to see. I wasn't her partner, I was her prop. Her well-behaved soldier, turned house pet, brought out for events and kept quiet. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped loudly across the floor. The laughter faltered, heads turned, eyes widened, but I didn't say a word. Not yet. I looked around that room. The crystal lights, the fake smiles, the people who never asked what I gave up. And I knew, deep in my gut, something had just shifted. Something they wouldn't see coming. But I did, because I had lived it, carried it, buried it. And now it was ready to rise. I stood still for a beat, letting the tension settle. The ballroom was quiet now, no more laughter, no more glasses clinking. Just 100 polished shoes frozen mid-step and faces watching to see if the man they mocked would finally crumble. I didn't crumble. I took one slow, deliberate breath, then straightened my tie. I looked around the room, not at their faces, but at the crystal lights and the expensive paintings. I finally spoke, my voice calm, flat, and loud enough that it carried easily without needing to shout. You've all made assumptions about what I do, about what my value is, and you're all entitled to your opinions. But you're wrong. The lawyer, Garrett, started to speak. Now look here, David. I cut him off, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the deep, unmistakable authority of a man used to giving commands in high-stakes situations. You asked if I still worked on airplanes. I still do. I just returned from a 10-month deployment overseas that was classified under national security protocols. The room went silent, a heavy, cold silence that pressed down on every single person. My wife finally looked at me, her face pale, the realization dawning in her eyes. The reason my social media is dark and my name isn't on a fancy plaque isn't that I'm irrelevant. It's because, while you were laughing about my laundry skills, I was coordinating humanitarian airlifts into East Africa and securing the initial Kabul evacuation efforts. I paused, letting the scope of the two jobs settle in their minds, folding laundry versus coordinating global crisis response. I didn't lose my job, Garrett. I changed my focus. And the reason my wife asked me not to talk about it tonight is that it's hard to talk about operational planning when people are focused on their next promotion. I stepped back from the table. Every eye was locked on me. I didn't shout. I didn't beg for respect. I simply stated the fact that obliterated their narrative. I'm Lieutenant Colonel David Kane, United States Air Force. And my silence wasn't a weakness. It was a condition of the oath I swore to this country. I didn't wait for the applause, or the apology, or the stammering questions. I simply walked away from the table, leaving her family and my wife frozen in the sudden, shattering realization that the man they had dismissed as a background character was, in fact, the most important man in the room. I left the restaurant immediately and drove straight to the base, not even bothering to change out of the rented suit. The fallout didn't take long. Not professional fallout, the military system is slow, but absolute. The social fallout was instant. The next morning, the news channels began carrying stories that had been suppressed by security clearances. USAF Lieutenant Colonel Kane praised for quiet, decisive action in East African relief. Then came the photo. Not in a suit, but in my fatigues, standing tall next to a 4-star general at a major international conference. My wife's phone must have been overloaded. The same colleagues who used to laugh now sent frantic, sycophantic emails. Her family was stunned, not by my success, but by her blindness to it. The center of gravity in our relationship had shifted completely. I didn't need to say a word. The fact that the man she had called her +1 was now leading strategic global response initiatives spoke louder than any argument. I stayed on the base for a week, handling the official transition into my new role, Advisor for Global Humanitarian Response. A role that gave me the platform I needed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I let go of the bitterness the moment I spoke the truth. I realized that my worth had never been tied to their approval. It was tied to the uniform I wore, the oaths I kept, and the silence I maintained. The divorce was inevitable, not because of anger, but because the silence between us had finally become louder than the life we shared. She had chosen her spotlight. I had chosen my shadow. I didn't stay silent out of spite, and I didn't speak up at the dinner party for revenge. I spoke the truth. I transitioned fully into my new advisory role, a position that required strategy, dignity, and quiet resolve qualities I had honed in the Air Force. Some people wear power on their sleeves in the form of titles, wealth, or expensive PR firms. Others wear it under armor in the form of duty, commitment, and sacrifice. Either way, it's not your job to validate someone's worth. That job is yours alone. I spent time visiting Walter Reed, seeing the men and women who carried burdens you couldn't see. Soldiers turned shadows, husbands turned ghosts, just like I had been. I didn't start a foundation with a big name or a fancy gala. I focused on a small, quiet initiative supporting the transitions of veterans who, like me, chose to be silent about their service because the missions were classified or too painful to recount. We called it the Silent Ranks Initiative. It wasn't about applause. It was about giving these silent heroes a voice when they were ready. My daughter started dropping by more often. She didn't see me as the man who stayed home anymore. She saw the weight I carried and the spine it took to carry it without breaking. When I look back at that dinner, I don't feel bitterness. I feel clarity. I learned that the greatest strategy isn't about what you show people, but about what you keep in reserve. Silence isn't weakness, it's a strategy. And sometimes it's the only armor strong enough to protect what truly matters. I don't need anyone to say they were wrong. That moment passed. I got what I needed, my own voice, my own ground, and the knowledge that I had served with honor even when no one was watching. I am Lieutenant Colonel David Kane, and I'm finally at peace.